Year, church! All right, we are joined by obviously a few staff in the room as they're allowed to be, and we're joined by all of you online, all the campuses and people we love from all around the world, and we just want to wish you a very, very happy New Year. So today I'm starting a brand new series called Lessons from Lockdown. And for 2020, there wasn't anybody that I know anyway that didn't spend at least some time in lockdown. And most of us, if we are honest about it, didn't like it. We felt like our rights were violated. We felt like our jobs were jeopardized. We thought our relationships were marginalized. The extroverts hated it. The introverts barely noticed the difference. I saw a meme the other day, cracked me up. It says, when the lockdown is over, let's not tell some people. You know those ones. Those were the ones we were socially distancing from before the pandemic. And we just want to keep that up. And so anyway, it's been an interesting time. But the reigning champion of lockdown is actually in the New Testament, and his name was Paul, and no one experienced more lockdown than this guy. He was in more prisons, in more places than anyone maybe ever. You think about it, everywhere he went, he ended up in prison. You know, it's funny because, when we have traveling speakers come to Winnipeg, they want to know what the hotels are like. When Paul traveled, he would write ahead and ask them what the prison was going to be like, because that's probably where he was going to end up. No joke. Pretty much everywhere he went, he ended up in prison. And most of you know, because you've read the book of Acts, that at the end of his life, he spent probably 4 to 4.5 years in lockdown, in one prison or another. And I'm going to tell the story in a moment. But what happened in that place, in those times, was he wrote what are called the prison epistles. And they are Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. These 4 epistles, known as the prison epistles, the first 3 ones in particular, are probably his greatest works. The most depth of theology, the most heartfelt, the most mature of all. And we spend a lot of time. And to think that he actually wrote them from the place of prison is remarkable. And I want you to think about this because the Apostle Paul ministered remotely to the church for 4.5 years of his life. He never saw them again for the rest of his life. Never saw the pastors, never saw the churches. These incredible things that he did all over the world or all over Asia Minor, he never saw those churches again. And think about it. He had no telephone. He had no email. He had no Zoom. He had no internet streaming service like we had today. He had to send letters that probably went on the back of a mule and then on a boat and then back onto a camel. And who knows how long it would have taken there. It probably would have taken months and months and months every time he communicated with the church. But he managed to do it, and he did it for over 4 years. You know what I think when I read that? I think we don't have anything to complain about, really. I mean, we have so much technology at our disposal. But I know we're all kind of getting sick of it. And I told Kathy the other day, I said, when this thing's all over, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go on a holiday anywhere in the world. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a map of the world up on the wall. I'm going to close my eyes, throw a dart at it. And wherever that dart lands, that's where we're going to go. So apparently, we're going on a 2-week vacation behind the couch. Still can't find that dart. So let me tell you the story of Paul a little bit and his journey. So we know that for about 14 years of his life, he was the chief of the apostles. I mean, he went through Asia Minor. He had 3 missionary journeys. He established churches. He raised up leaders. He raised up other apostles and teachers, and he established churches everywhere he went. And he was a going concern. He literally, it says, every person in Asia heard the gospel, or in Asia Minor heard the gospel. And then he got it in his mind that he wanted to go to Jerusalem. Many of you remember this story. It's all in the book of Acts. And he wanted to go to Jerusalem, and people around him warned him and said, don't go to Jerusalem. If you go to Jerusalem, you're going to get arrested. You're going to get in trouble. He was determined to go, and he goes. So he's pretty well known. People know who he was outside of Jerusalem. And when he gets there, like day one, there's a huge riot. They're so mad at him, and there's literally violence in the street, and there's a mob, and they grab him, and they drag him out in the street, and they're actually going to kill him. They're actually going to murder Paul. Not that he's not used to that happening. He's had other examples of that. But they're about to kill him, and the Roman garrison, they swoop in, and they capture him, and they pull him out, and they really didn't give a rip about Paul's life. What they were concerned about was the fact that there was rioting in the streets, and they had to bring this insurrection to an end, and they knew he was at the center of it, so they grabbed him, and they go and they pull him, and they're going to beat him, And he announces to them that he's actually a Roman citizen, which was pretty uncommon for a Jew, but he was. And he says, you can't beat me, I'm a Roman citizen. And that was true. It was illegal to beat and to abuse a Roman citizen. So he played his citizenship card. So then he allowed them to face his accusers, and the Sanhedrin sort of showed up, and they were so confused. They didn't even know what they were mad at him about. They didn't know what their charges against Paul were. And they couldn't even agree. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were in a disagreement. If you read the story, it seems like the crux of it, they were just mad at him for preaching the resurrection. So you know what he did? He told the story of his conversion on the road to Damascus, and that seemed to be his default. You see it through the book of Acts. He keeps telling that story, and he just gives his testimony. Anyway, that doesn't get anywhere. He's in the hands of the Romans, and they say, we got to do something with this guy. He's a Roman. The Jews hate him. He's Jewish. And so they said, we'll ship him off to Caesarea. And we'll let Felix, who was the governor of Judea, we'll let him deal with it. So they shipped him off to Caesarea. So he gets to Caesarea, and the governor there, Felix, actually examines him and says, I don't see what the problem is. I don't see what this guy has done. I don't see any crime he's committed. I can't really release him because the Jews aren't going to like it. So he throws him in prison in Caesarea. Are you ready for this? For 2 years, without any real formal charges, without a trial. And really what he's looking for, go read the story, he's really looking for Paul to bribe him, and if he bribed him, he would have let him out. But he won't bribe him, and he won't give him money, and he keeps on calling for him. He leaves him languishing away for 2 years in this place. Now, if you ever go to Israel, you have to go to Caesarea, because there's the remnants of that city there. It's a seacoast town on the sea of Mediterranean Sea. Here's a picture of it. When Kathy and I were there in 2007. If you look, you can tell 2007, I'm 22 in that picture. And so you can do the math, figure it out yourself. But it's this beautiful seaside city that was built by Herod the Great, the builder. And if you look at this next picture, this was Paul's cell. So we went and hung out in Paul's cell for a little bit. You say, how do you know that it was Paul's cell? I don't really, I'm just making that up. And I think it could have been anywhere, who knows where it was. But I'm trying to help you imagine what this place would have looked like. And one of the most interesting things about Caesarea, for me anyway, is that King Herod built a seaside pool there. And here's a picture of it. It was literally the first infinity pool in all of history. True story, it is a pool. It was, everybody thinks these infinity pools are something new. Herod built one 2,000 years ago. Remember, it was featured in Jesus Christ Superstar. Prove to me that you're divine, turn my water into wine. Prove to me that you're no fool, walk across my swimming pool. Remember that line? Of course you do. There's the swimming pool. Fun fact. So anyway, here he is. He's there for 2 years. Felix actually ends up having his term end, and Festus, love these names, Felix, Festus. Festus is the new governor. He doesn't know what to do with him. He's going to try him, let the Jews try him. Paul says, no, I'm a Roman citizen. I demand my Roman rights to go to Rome and be tried by Caesar. So they stick him on a boat, and they ship him across the Mediterranean Sea. They went to a lot of trouble for him. And of course, again, you know the story. They were shipwrecked off the island of Malta, and they ended up spending 3 months on the island of Malta. He could have actually easily escaped, but he was determined. Not only did he want to go to Jerusalem, now he actually wants to go to Rome because he thinks there's going to be an opportunity for the gospel. Eventually, he gets to Rome. He never does get his trial, and he's imprisoned in Rome for the next 2 years of his life, and that's where the book of Acts ends. And he's there preaching the gospel and ministry. And if there was one undeniable lesson from lockdown that we find from the story of Paul, it was this, is that attitude is everything. I mean, if you look at his life, you've got to find a lot of good qualities and a lot of good virtues in this man. But I'll tell you, when it comes to attitude, there's nothing that is more predominant than that. And so we look at this verse. We're going to look at our little verse here today, and it's from one of his prison epistles. It's Colossians chapter 2. And it's verse 5, and it says this, for though I am absent in the flesh, pointing out the fact that he wasn't there, yet I am with you in spirit, rejoicing to see your good order and the steadfastness of your faith in Christ. And whenever you're catching this, he says, I'm absent from you because I'm in prison. I'm in Rome. I'm actually hundreds and hundreds of miles from you. I'm never going to see you again. But this is the attitude of my heart. I'm rejoicing to see how you are doing in your faith. And when you read the prison epistles, you'd never understand or never believe that he was actually in prison. You'd never know that if we didn't know the history here, because his attitude is so positive and he's so upbeat and he's so caring about everybody other than himself. And so we find him here saying, I rejoice in what I'm seeing in you. In fact, in Philippians and Colossians, he uses the word rejoice or rejoicing 14 times. And so he's one happy dude. How that's possible, I don't know, except we're going to try to find out today. So I want to tell you a little story today that I've never told you before, that you didn't know about me, but you're going to find out today. So when I was in my 20s, I decided I wanted to be a pilot. And so I actually enrolled in flight school. And the very first time I went flying, I was up at St. Andrews Airport there. I had the bug, and I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I loved flying, and I actually had an aptitude for it. When you love something, you usually get pretty good at it pretty fast. And I think up to that point in the history of the school, I soloed earlier than any other pilot had ever done before. Normally it's 15 to 20 hours with an instructor before you're solo. My instructor let me solo after 7 hours. He got in trouble for that, by the way. They said, what are you doing letting this 20-something-year-old kid fly a $250,000 plane? And he said, I had to argue your case and tell him that I knew you could do it. Anyway, that was my dream, and I was flying, and I was going out every week and taking these lessons and training. And then eventually what happened during that period of time is I came to Christ. And God changed the dream in my heart, and I ended up going to Bible school instead of flight school. And I went off in a completely different direction. Anyway, here's what I learned in those years of flight school was this. In aviation, attitude is everything. Literally. And when I'm talking about attitude, I'm not talking about the disposition of your heart. I'm talking about the disposition of the plane. And it's a terminology they use in aviation about attitude. And there's basically 3 attitudes of the plane. And attitude has to do with the plane relative to the horizon or relative to the earth. And so here's what they are. They're pitch, they're roll, and they're yaw. And so the first one, I'm just going to show you a little picture of it. Hopefully you'll be able to understand it. The first one is pitch. Pitch has to do with whether the plane is nose down or nose up, pitch down or pitch up. And that's how you go up and down in a plane, obviously. And then the next one is roll. And roll has to do with the banking of the plane. And it rolls like this. And you've all been in a plane. You all know you're coming into the airport and they roll it over like this to come in for the landing. So you've all experienced that. The one that most people aren't experienced with is yaw. And yaw has to do, it's basically like crabbing. It's when the plane's still flying in this direction, but the plane is sideways like this. And that's called yaw. And I'll get to that in a moment. You'll understand what that's all about. So what I want to do is I want to go through these 3 attitudes, and I want to relate them to how they're similar to our own attitudes in life. And the first one, of course, is pitch. And it's really the most important thing in flying is to have your pitch either pitch up or pitch down. And I got news for you. You almost always fly a plane pitch up. Now, when you're taking off, obviously you've all been on a plane. You've all seen it take off. If you're going to gain altitude, you have to go pitch up. So here's just a picture of an airliner. Pitch up, that's a Airbus A380. Those planes, that is a real picture at an air show, by the way. It can take off almost straight up. And in fact, once it gets a little bit further, it actually is going straight up. These huge motors, this incredible plane. But what a lot of people don't think about is that when a plane lands, it actually also lands pitch up or attitude up. And so here's just a plane coming in, and you've all experienced this. The rear wheels always touch first. If you're touching on that nose wheel in the front, you are in trouble. You've landed incorrectly. And so the essence of this is that a plane, for the most part, is always attitude up. And if it goes attitude down during a takeoff or during a landing, you will probably die, which is exactly what happened with the Boeing 737 MAX 8. And some of you remember this story where the computer glitched and it pitched down right after takeoff. Here's a picture of that Ethiopian flight, and it's a simulation, but the nose also suddenly went down. Pilot couldn't pull it out, crashed. And of course, the scene was just devastating. Hundreds of people, every single person on board was killed in that flight. And this story that I'm telling you about pitch up or pitch down and how attitude is everything in flight is actually a bit of a metaphor for life. See, for us, we need to be flying in life pitch up. And as soon as you get pitch down, as soon as you get nose down, as soon as you get attitude down, you are in trouble. You know, interesting research has been done on the workplace these days, and they're telling employers this. They're telling people to hire for attitude and train for skill. See, historically, we've always done exactly the opposite. We find people that have the skills, we find people that have the education, we have people that have the technical skills, and we hire those people and hope they have a good attitude. And they've discovered that of new hires, 89% of new hires fail because of their attitude, and only 11% because of their incompetence. You know what that means for you? That means you can be as incompetent as you like at work as long as you have a good attitude. Our staff is thrilled with that. They just heard some really good news here. And here was the simple experiment that was done with it. The study is so simple. All they did was ask employees this: would you rather work shorthanded today or with somebody with a bad attitude? And almost without exception, they chose to work shorthanded. Why? Because a bad attitude is contagious. A bad attitude draws you down. They call them emotional vampires. You know why they call them that? Because they suck the life out of you. And you know why people don't like vampires? They're a pain in the neck. That's why. It's a good one, wasn't it? I'll tell you. And for me, this is sort of the big one. Everybody, our staff all knows this. They're sitting here. They all know this. If I said to them, attitude is, they would all say everything. They know how important that is to me. I'll put up with a lot. They know this. I mean, I will put up with some mistakes. I will put up with failure. I'll put up with poor judgment. I'll even put up with some occasional incompetence, but I won't put up with a bad attitude. Because a bad attitude draws everybody down. It sucks everybody down. And there's really nothing more important in life than having this positive attitude. And when we look at the people around us, when we look at the world we live in today, people have immensely bad attitudes. Let's face it. People complain about what? Everything. They complain about everything. They complain about the government, and they complain about the weather, and they complain about their rights, and they complain about the lineup at Costco, and they complain about the traffic, and they complain. Is there anything we don't complain about? We complain about everything. And we have become this nation and people, particularly in Western culture, we are people that actually complain about every single thing there is to complain with. See, attitude is a choice, and you have to decide, and you have to make this decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to be attitude up, or I'm going to be attitude down? Because if I am attitude down, I'm going to go into the ground, and I'm going to bring everybody with me. But if I'm attitude up, everything changes. And you know what it is that gets us down, the things that pull our attitude down, the things that really get in our craw? It's actually not the big things, is it? It's the little things. It's all those little niggly things. It's when the waitress is slow at the restaurant, or whether we are standing in line for something somewhere. Those things drive us crazy. I remember this story. It was one time when I was on a 4-lane highway. I'm driving along, and there's this car, and it's in the left lane beside a semi, just going and tracking right with the semi. You've all been there, right? And I'm boxed in and behind this car, and I'm thinking, what is she doing? You say, why are you calling her a woman? Because it was one. That's just, neither here nor there, just, inconsequential, but it was a woman. And she's in front of me, she's got me boxed in, and I'm trying not to have a bad attitude about this, but I'm there for like 10 minutes. And so what do? You all know what you do, right? You ram into them, right? No, you pull up close behind them, you flash your lights, you honk. So I'm doing all those things. And I find myself getting closer and closer and closer to her because I'm actually trying to aggravate her enough to get her to move. Finally, honest to God, this is going on for 10 minutes, she finally accelerates and gets in front of the semi. And I'm grateful, and I'm thinking I'm going to give her a thumbs up or something, just thank her for moving. And so I go past her, I look over to her, she flips me the bird. I think she's flipping me the bird. So I thought, come on, Mark, keep it calm, keep it real. So I decided to do the right thing, love your enemies, and so I blew her a kiss. Like that. She took her hands off the wheel, gave me double birdies, gave it to me, gave me double barreled. I thought, she's not even driving anymore. I'm not doing it, I'm not showing you, but you're all imagining it, aren't you? And I thought, what is wrong with us that we allow the smallest things in life to get in our craw? So I want to tell you a bit of an aviation story because I think it'll amuse you. So a number of years ago, Kathy had a friend who was a travel agent, and she phoned us one Wednesday, and she said, we have this charter flight going from Winnipeg to Honolulu, Hawaii, and we're just trying to fill the plane up, and I can give you tickets on that plane for $100 each. I said, really? She said, yes, but it's leaving Friday. And so I thought, well, I got to find somebody to preach for me. So I got somebody to preach for me. And so I thought, at $100, I'm not only taking Kathy, I'm going to take her parents too. And so for $400, all four of us flew. I was so excited about it. And this obviously was a number of years ago. You can imagine at $100, but it was still an incredible price. And so we got, and we got to the airport, and there's this huge 747 all waiting for us. We get onto the plane. Well, guess where we were sitting on the plane? Take a wild stab at it. Yeah, the back, in the tail section. But in those days, they had a smoking section in the plane, at the back of the plane, and we were in the smoking section for an 8-hour flight. I mean, imagine a smoking section on a plane is like having a peeing section in a swimming pool, right? I mean, eventually it's going to affect everybody. But anyway, in those days, smokers had rights. Remember when smokers weren't so contemptible, when we didn't hate them like we do now? I mean, they have no rights now, smokers. We don't even let them come indoors. We put up signs that say, no smoking. We don't serve your kind here. And they're the only people you can discriminate against. But in those days, they had rights. And we got stuck with them. And I remember what happened. The plane took off, and every last one of them lit up. And it was a nonstop smoke, or a nonstop flight, both. They never stopped smoking for the entire flight, for 8 hours. They just smoked like this. And they were lighting them off one another like this. I thought, man, I'm going to die in this place. And so I'm thinking, my eyes are watering, they're burning, I can't breathe anymore. I'm asking the stewardess, is there somewhere else I can move? She says, sorry, sir, the plane's full. We sold off our last seats. I think I know all about that. I'm in them. And I thought, I'm going to die here. I'm going to die here. And I thought, I am in such a bad mood. I'm going to Hawaii. I'm hoping you're picturing this. I'm going to Hawaii, but I'm miserable because I'm in the smoking section. And then I see this guy standing in the aisle, and he's got an unlit cigarette like this. And I knew what he was doing. He was someone from another section that was coming back to have a smoke in the smoking section. I thought, that scoundrel. And then I had this idea, because I'd been praying, Lord, get me out of here. And I went up to him and I said, sir, are you looking for somewhere to have that smoke? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, where is your seat? He says, up in first class in the bubble. And I said, I'd be willing to trade for you and your wife's seat for 20 minutes, and you can have my seat. And he said, okay. So Kathy and I went up to first class. But before I sat down in first class, I turned around and I faced that group of people in first class up in the bubble of the 747. And I said, are there any other smokers here today? Because I have 2 seats, premium seats in smoking class, that I would be willing to trade a minimum of 20 minutes a time down in the tail of the plane. Do you know that people traded with us almost the rest of the flight we spent in first class trading off with these people that can't go an hour without a smoke? It was a beautiful thing. And the whole point of that story was, I could have let the whole thing ruin my life, but instead I decided I'm just going to make the best of it, and I'm just going to give God the credit for it, because I feel like he came in, because I kept that positive attitude in the midst of it. He came into my rescue, and that's what happens when we have a positive attitude. The first thing we got to do is pitch up, get your attitude up. The second thing is roll. Now, you've all experienced this in the plane, and the roll is pretty much your favorite part, right? Maybe second to the takeoff. But the roll, don't you just love that feeling when the plane rolls? And here's what's interesting about the plane cannot turn without rolling. You actually have to use your ailerons, and what that does is it causes the plane to tip like this. You're not steering from back there, you're steering from your wings, and you tip them like this, and the plane banks like that, and that's how a plane turns. Now, a flying saucer doesn't need to do that. They can fly like this. So if you ever go on a flying saucer, they don't have to fly the same way. I'm just telling you that if you ever get abducted, you'll know. But for the rest of you, if you're in a plane, the plane has to bank in order to turn. And the metaphor for life is this. There's the picture. I knew it would show up eventually. And there's the picture of that plane. It's an exhilarating feeling. And it's true in life too. What it means is this, is that sometimes you have to roll with the situation. If you can't change the situation, you're going to have to roll with it. You're going to have to change direction, and you're going to have to let the forces of change move upon you. And here's what I want to say about this. I have a little verse I want to read you that you all know from Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. It says this, "For I have learned in whatever state I am in to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Wherever and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer lack. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We always love to quote that verse, don't we? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, but we always quote it out of context. The context is where Paul says, I have learned to be content in all things. I have learned to abound, and I've learned to be abased. I've learned to suffer lack, and I've learned to have abundance. I have learned to be content in all of these things. Did you notice the key in what he says? That he has learned to be content. Now, a guy who spends 4.5 years in prison, plus all the other stuff that he endured throughout his life, he probably was going to have to learn that. He's going to probably have to learn how to roll with the punches, roll with the situations, to not allow himself to get dragged down because things aren't going his way, but instead he learns to be content. Now, I want to ask you this question. In our culture, are we taught to be content or are we taught to be discontent? We live in a culture of discontent. We're told constantly, particularly by advertisers, that whatever we have is no good and that we should be discontent with it. I mean, why is every product on the shelf in the stores new and improved instead of like the one you used to buy, which was old and crappy? And it has to be new and improved, and we have to have this idea that advertisers convince us that our old life was no good or the old product was no good. Look how effective the cell phone companies have been on that. Every few months they bring out a new phone. And people have to have the new phone because the camera is better and our old camera was no good, or the processor is faster, or Siri is not quite as stupid as she used to be, or whatever it is. Not a big Apple guy, as you can tell. And we always have to have the latest gadget and the newest gadget. And you know who's been better at this than anybody else for decades and decades? It's been the car companies. The car companies tell you that you not only need it, you deserve it. In the 1970s, GM told you you deserved a Camaro. How many of you like the Camaro? There's the Camaro, and notice it? You deserve a car this good. And then the 80s, they told you you deserved a Buick Riata. I don't even know anybody that owned that car. Apparently nobody really deserved it. And then more recently, they're telling you you deserve an SUV, one of their SUVs. BMWs, Pastor Danny, have been telling us that we deserve the 3 Series, because it's just the way it is, you deserve it. Now here's what I find interesting. Mercedes-Benz doesn't even bother trying. They know you don't deserve their cars. They know you don't need them. And their question is, define need. Define need for me. That car, by the way, the SL63 AMG, is a $175,000 Canadian dollar car. Nobody needs that car. Probably nobody deserves that car. But somebody's going to go out and buy it because they want that car, right? But the sense is that we have been told that we deserve more or we need more. So I want to tell you a little story about someone you know, and his name is Timoteo, Pastor Timoteo. He's one of the pastors of the church in Matamoros, Mexico, and some of you on our staff for sure, and some of the people in our congregation have been there ministering. And we were there once, and we were in Matamoros, and we were going on a mission trip into another city, and it was about 200 kilometers away, so in the real world, that'd take, like 2 hours? But Timoteo wanted to take me in his car. And our van was going, but he insisted, I'm going because I'm staying a few more days. Why don't you ride with me? So I said, sure, I'll come with you. So he showed up in his car, and it was this big old, I don't know, like a 1975, I don't know what year, Mercury Marquis, big old beast with the back end just hung down like this. The springs were just shot. Tires were bald. I didn't know if I wanted to get in this car and drive through Mexico for 2 hours or whatever it was going to be, but I did, and I jumped in the car. And off we went, and he was so pleased with his car. He was driving it along, and he had a big smile on his face. He was so pleased he could take the pastor for a ride in his car and go on this little tour for 200 kilometers. It was 100 degrees out Fahrenheit, and his car has 460 air conditioning. You know what 460 air conditioning is? 4 windows down, 60 miles an hour. That's how you cool it off. And so we're cruising along, and about 20 minutes, half an hour into the ride, he pulls over into the side of the road and stops. I said, why have we stopped? He points at the temperature gauge, and it's pinned like this, and there's steam coming up from the engine. So we get out of the car, he goes to the trunk, he opens up the trunk. Now I know why the back end of the car was like this. His whole trunk is full of milk jugs full of water. And he grabs one of these milk jugs, and he takes a rag, and he opens the radiator, fills the radiator up, let it cool down for a bit first, fills the radiator up, puts the cap back on. Gusto, he says. And we get back in the car, we drive for another half hour. Does this again. So this 200-kilometer trip took 5 to 6 hours, and we stopped every half hour to put water. And by the time, we used all the water up from the time we left till the time we got to this place. And then we had to go to a gas station because in 200 kilometers, we'd run out of gas. We got to the gas station, so I told him that I'd be willing to put, not only pay for the gas, but I'd pay for the oil if he needed some oil. So he filled the tank up with gas, and he put, are you ready for this? He put 3 quarts of oil in it. 3 quarts. It burns 400 gallons of water, 200 gallons of gas, and 3 quarts of oil. And here's where I'm going with all this. All day long, I was asking him questions. And all day long, Timoteo was answering this way. He was saying, estoy contento. Estoy contento. You know what that means? He said, I am content. Every question I asked him, he told me that he was content. In the Spanish language, you know this, that the word happy is feliz, like Feliz Navidad. And that's happy. He wasn't saying he was happy, but he was saying that he was content. And with whatever he had, he was content. And the whole time, it was such a lesson for me to see how little this guy had and this crummy car that I wouldn't drive across the street to the garbage dump. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't. And yet he was content. He was contento with this car that God had given him, and he's so proud of it. And I thought, why are these people so content with so little and we're so discontent with so much? And I always go back to this verse of Paul's where he says, I have learned in all things to be content. And whether I have it or whether I don't have it, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And you know, if we can learn to be discontent in the small things, you know what? Here's what will happen. When we face the real challenges in life, the big things in life, then we're going to be able to be content in the midst of those things. And I want to tell you a really tragic story where I learned another lesson about this. And so I got a call one day, and this guy had been in a car accident, and I'd heard the story, and he needed me or wanted me to come pray for him. And what had happened, somehow or another, he'd ended up going through the windshield, and it tore his face off from his chin all the way back to his scalp. And he went into the hospital, and they folded it back down. They sewed his face back on. And so I knew that going in, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do and say when I see this guy in the hospital? I'm sort of psychologically preparing myself. But you've all been there. It's amazing how many stupid things we can say when we go visit someone in the hospital, no matter how hard you try. And sort of instinctively, I walked into his room. There he was, stitches all over his face. I forgotten everything that I'd rehearsed because I was kind of in a little bit of shock. And I digressed, defaulted to what I would normally say. I say, so how are you doing? Sort of the wrong question, wouldn't you think? So how are you doing? To which he says, I'm doing fantastic, Pastor Mark. I said, what? Because I'm not, right? I said, what do you mean you're doing fantastic? You just were in this car accident. You just had your face ripped off. He said, all the doctors told me I should have been dead, and I'm not dead. And he says, I'm so grateful, and I'm so excited to be alive. And I said, yeah, how about your face? Are you concerned about that? He said, you know what? I wasn't that good looking to begin with. And he says, my wife tells me this is going to be an improvement. I thought, what an amazing attitude. Who has an attitude like that in life? And I thought, you know what? A guy like that, I know for a fact, is a guy that's content in the small things. And that's the only way you're ever going to be able to face the hard and the difficult things in life, is if you can face the small things in life with that proper right attitude and roll with the punches and roll with the situations in life. It's like the story of this husband and wife. They're in seeing the doctor, and the doctor turns to the wife and says, I don't like the look of your husband. She says, neither do I, but he's a good provider. What can I say? So the first thing, of course, is the pitch up and down, and the second thing is the roll, and that's our attitude to be able to roll and be content with whatever life serves up. And the last and final thing, and I'll only take a couple of minutes on this like I normally do, has to do with this attitude in flight called yaw. And yaw means what's happening is we're actually flying this way, but the plane turns sideways like this. And what happens is we're still going in the same direction, but we're askew like this. And it's the strangest thing in flight when the plane goes into yaw, and you're sort of crabbing sideways. And the way you deal with it is, the reason you're in yaw is because you're in a crosswind. And you mostly have to deal with it as you're landing the plane, you're bringing the plane in, and the plane goes askew like this. And if you don't know what you're going to do, you are going to crash. And I want to show you a little video here. It's only a few seconds long, and I'm just going to tell you about it. This guy is landing an airliner, a big plane, a jet, and he's in a massive crosswind. You can see he's coming in completely crooked. Watch the yellow fin on the back. Watch the yellow fin. Watch it, watch it, watch it. Watch that rudder. Right now, bang. Did you see it? You see right at the last second there, he hit his rudder, and by hitting that rudder, he pulled the plane straight. You can't land. You can't fly it in straight because the wind is pulling you crossways. And so he pulled that rudder just at the last second, pulled that plane straight, and did a perfect landing. I mean, an inexperienced pilot would have crash landed that thing. And the thing that amazes me about Paul was he lived his whole life with crosswinds. I mean, think about the things he encountered. He was beaten, he was flogged, he was in prison, he was once stoned. And how did he deal with all these things? He said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And you know what he relied on? You ready for this? It's a play on words. You ready for it? He relied on the Yahweh. You got it? The Yahweh. Jehovah. You were wondering where I was going to go with that. It's all a play of words. And sometimes what you have to do is you just have to throw yourself at the mercy of God. I have a friend of mine, a pastor, and he always uses this expression. And when he's in a situation that he doesn't know how to deal with it and it doesn't look good and it's not what he wanted, he says, I had no other choice but to take a big dose of the sovereignty of God. And that's the Yahweh. That's the Jehovah way. That's when we say, I'm just going to throw myself and put myself in your hands, God, because I can't deal with this. There's nothing I can do to deal with this. So I just have to rely on Jehovah, on Yahweh to get me through this situation. And that's what Paul did. Isn't that what he said? He said, we are hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. We are perplexed, but we're not in despair. We're persecuted, but we're not forsaken. We're knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Do you remember he later wrote a song about it? Went something like this. I get knocked down, I get up again. You know the song. And Paul didn't write that one, but he could have, right? You're never going to keep me down. And he just, got knocked down. He gets up again. You're never going to keep him down. That's the attitude that he had. Let me just close with one final story about this. Because nobody likes hardship in life. Nobody likes the difficulties in life. And I don't know if you've read Matthew Henry's commentary. One of the greatest commentaries of all time is written by Matthew Henry years and years ago. Still famous to this day. Great preacher. Great commentator of the scripture. And he had an encounter one day where he was robbed. And he sat down and he wrote this in his journal. And he said, I rejoice today because I was robbed. And he says, I give thanks for four reasons. First, I am thankful that though I was robbed, I've never been robbed before. And secondly, I'm thankful that though they took my wallet, they did not take my life. Thirdly, I am thankful that though they took my all, it wasn't much. And finally, and most importantly, I am thankful that though I was robbed, it was not I who was doing the robbing. And I remember reading that thinking to myself, this guy gets robbed and he finds four things to be thankful about. This guy goes through this calamity. He knew how to rely on him. He knew how to throw himself at the sovereignty of God. He understood that attitude was everything and that all things work together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you if you'll do one thing and one thing only, and that is keep your attitude up, because attitude is everything. Amen. So I want to speak to those of you online here that are watching that maybe have never invited Christ into your life to be your Lord and Savior. And I want to give you an opportunity to make that decision today. And it's the Yahweh is what it is. It's when we rely and trust in him and recognize that he's the only way we're going to get through this. And if you've never made Jesus the Lord of your life, your Lord and your Savior, it's the most important decision that you will ever make. And right where you are in your home, whether you're with someone, whether you're not, I just want you to consider, first of all, just clicking that button that says raise hand. You just click that button, and by doing that, you're making that first initial step, and you're saying, yes, I want to make Christ my Lord. And then secondly, I want you to pray with me. And this is a prayer inviting Christ into your heart. And right where you are, just say it right out loud and repeat after me. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the work of the cross. That though I was a sinner, you died for me. And then you rose again on the third day. And you forever live to be my Lord. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You will lead me through everything that I will face in life. And though hardships will come, you will always be with me because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Amen.